Now we're going to hear from three journalists who work for broadcasting or media in other countries. The first, to my right, is Richard Madan. He is a CBC News correspondent covering politics, economics, and trade. Actually, all three journalists joining me cover the shenanigans here in Washington and the White House. To my left is Patrícia Vasconcellos, and she is a correspondent for the Brazilian TV network SBT. And then to my far left is Daniel Schmidt. He is a reporter for various German media outlets, including Die Zeit, Süddeutsche Zeitung, and many others. So we're going to start with just your overall reactions about how public opinion looks to you, or at least, if not public opinion, then the people that you speak with on a regular basis. What are they feeling? What are their thoughts about the outcome of the 2024 election? Why don't we start with you, Patrícia?
Thank you so much, Dina. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's really an honor to be here and discuss this with you, with Richard and Daniel, and all of you. My foreign perception is that I believe that this U.S. election showed to us or revealed a country that it is still very much divided. And I would say that because, of course, the results, they show that, of course, we see the U.S. showing a shift to the right. However, if we see from our perspective, when I say the Brazilian perspective, is because we in Brazil, as in many countries in the world, we define the winner if we see the number of the popular vote. And if we see this, we have one candidate with 48% and another candidate with 50-something%. And so from my perspective, if we were broadcasting this news from Brazil, I would say that we would see, or we would write or broadcast as a result of an election that shows a country is still very much divided. That's how I see. And the second perception is that democracy is still working. There's so much that we spoke about, the importance of democracy and how democratic institutions will be affected or not by this result. And we saw a candidate that now he is a president elected, that despite everything that he was facing, he was elected. So I see that this shows that democracy works, and of course that because we have a president that invited him to the White House and we were there covering this and have this image of political rivals shaking hands at the Oval Office, that was a very powerful image.
Okay, great. And Richard, from Canada, what is the perception there?
Well, first and foremost, just to there we
hold
go.
It very close.
Okay. First and foremost, thanks again for inviting me, and I hope you all speak fluent Canadian. So, the late, great Robin Williams described Canada living on top of a meth lab. And Canadians watch American politics very closely. And in this last election, it really looks like the U.S. has taken another tilt inwards, which is quite challenging for the Canada-U.S. relationship. About $1 trillion in trade across the borders every year, everything from auto parts to half your hockey teams in the U.S., some of the players. So they watch it closely, and there's a lot of challenges, particularly in those punishing tariffs that Trump has vowed to impose on allies, including Canada, and that could affect energy, it could affect all exports from Canada to the U.S. Not to mention the relationship between incoming President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. They're not exactly best friends, so that's going to pose a few more challenges down the road. As for the democracy side of things, it shows democracy has worked despite a lot of the rhetoric we were hearing during the campaign. In the last few months, I spent a lot of time traveling across the U.S., from Utah to Nevada to Pennsylvania to Georgia. And it really comes down to the economic message. The last panel talked about exit polls and what they were saying, but it really felt like the message this election was the economy, the uncertainty, and the anger that still resonates throughout the country. And I think it's a lesson about having an economic message. It's also a warning to Western governments around the world about incumbency. As the last panel said, there's still a lot of anger post-COVID. There's still a lot of feelings that the citizens are not getting what they want from government, and that is a big warning sign. There will be an election in Canada next year where Justin Trudeau is going to face his 4th term. He's going to campaign on his understanding and knowledge of dealing with the incoming Trump presidency, but the incumbency issue is going to be a problem for him. There's a G7 rather next year, G7 next year, which will be taking place in Canada, where President Trump will make his next appearance on Canadian soil. His last visit to Canada didn't go so well, so we'll see how that rolls out. But ultimately, this change and this turn inward is challenging for the Canadians. But just last night, Trump named his incoming ambassador to Canada, which the Canadian folks that I've been speaking to this morning are quite optimistic that these challenges, whether it's the reopening of NAFTA talks 2 years from now, the tariff talks, they feel that that's encouraging that his point person, his envoy to Canada, is someone who knows what they're doing.
And Daniel, since you're our sole participant from Europe, you can speak about the view in Germany, but also maybe a broader European perspective.
Yes, of course. Same. Thank you very much for having me, and good morning. Back home, I got a lot of questions, mostly from my mom, if there's going to be a civil war in the United States during the campaign. That was something people were concerned. You can argue rightly so or not, yeah. But that's the question I got a lot. When you're out there and you talk to people, I also felt the economic message, how are people doing, how are people getting by, was one of the biggest themes. But then people back home asked me and said, wow, okay, eggs are so expensive in the US, but you'd rather go with a fascist? So that's what people are trying to make sense of. If you have these two alternatives, is this really what you want? And I only got the last 5-10 minutes of the panel before me, and maybe it is a changed election and people just weren't happy with what was happening or what is happening in the White House and Biden and so on. But coming from Europe with a history of this kind of, he's a strong man who makes populist promises, who tells you, this is easy, day one, Ukraine, a finger snap and it's solved. Middle East, same. One day, or even before I get into office, this is all going to go away. Yeah, sure. They've been fighting for a long time, and if someone had an easy solution that was a finger snap, maybe they would have done it by now. But anyway, so back home, the idea of, even if you say, oh, Harris, is she a perfect candidate? Is she a little goofy? Is she, someone I totally get behind? Has she got the right view on the Middle East and so on? Even if you say, this isn't it, people back home ask me, the other choice, like, surely you would go with her. And, maybe your common sense tells you, yeah, you would, but the country didn't. So I think there's one thing of how it's perceived, but also I think for us as journalists to go, okay, do we have to question ourselves? Obviously, we went outside the country, we talk to people, we travel, and it's not like that we were totally surprised that this could happen, but the idea that if you look at it, he won in 2016, he somewhat within the system narrowly lost in 2020 and then won again in 2024. So Donald Trump, with whatever he's doing, has been resonating for almost 10 years now. So there is obviously something there that he can say, that he can do, that he can promise, that just is appealing to a big part of the country. And people back home wonder why.
It's a good question. Okay, so I'm going to throw a question out to all three of you, and then I have some specifics for each of you if there's time. So we still have roughly 15 minutes, I think. So yeah, a lot to cover. How will the election affect the credibility of the United States as a global partner in the world or in your specific areas that you cover? And what steps do you think the United States could take, or at least the U.S. leadership or organizations like ours being the World Affairs Councils, my organization, the organizations of the panelists that were just here, to reassure the world of steadfastness in global leadership? Who would like to take the first stab?
Sure. I mean, just off the top, one thing to expect from this next Trump presidency, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on Western allies, including Canada, is boosting defense spending. Trump had rightly called out other Western countries during his Trump 1.0 about raising their commitment to NATO spending of 2% GDP. Canada is towards the bottom of it. That's put a lot of pressure on the Canadian government to boost defense spending, because there's long been a perception in Canada that the US is their big brother. They'll have their back. In 2016, the Canadians discovered that, wait a second, we need to boost our own defense spending, whether it's on NATO or in the Arctic and the far north. And this is something that has since vaulted to the public debate in Canada, is spending on defense. So from that perspective, Western countries will likely be under more pressure to boost their defense spending, and that'll also apply to Europe. And I think that is one thing that will come out of this next administration. The other issue that we'll be watching closely is just how aligned the US will be leading efforts in, say, Ukraine, in Israel. That is going to be, I believe, Canada or America's role in the world will take center stage. It'll be more consequential. Will the US continue to be a leader on the world stage when it comes to foreign conflicts, or will they take a step back? That is something that I think the rest of the world will be watching in the medium term.
Okay. Daniel, since Richard just brought up the defense spending issue, and many countries in NATO have increased in the past year their spending. Recently, French Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron said that Europe must assert its security independence from the United States after learning about the outcome of the U.S. elections. So I wondered if you could speak to that point and how that resonates among Europeans in general, whether that's just something, in Macron's circle, or, Europeans have been talking about this for many, many years. Is this now the time that something more concrete would happen?
Again, my mom is getting a hard time, but she sent me an article yesterday about troops playing out different scenarios and different think tanks putting out papers of what's going to happen if Ukraine falls within, we're talking weeks, months or so, because that's what they maybe expected when the war started. 6 weeks later, this was gonna happen, but then Ukraine held out. They defended themselves. They got a lot of support. They got a lot of money, especially from here. But people are wondering what is going to happen with Trump probably being more pro-Russian than pro-Ukrainian. So there are all these scenarios in people's minds. What's going to happen and what are we to do? Even if Macron says that, and even if, when Richard said many countries will have to up their spending, I was thinking, many countries or Germany, because that's also something that Trump kept saying, Germany, not just cars, but, your defense spending, 2%, get it up there. It is something that Germany, I think, came to realize you have to do more, and if Ukraine falls, then basically, Poland as a NATO member, you can take a train from Berlin to Warsaw in 2.5 hours, I think. That's pretty close. So they would be right on our doorstep. people don't know what that means. We've had it before, the Cold War. It wasn't just on our doorstep. It was, East Germany. It was right there. But then I think people thought, okay, we are not at this time in history anymore. Suddenly it's coming back, and you are not really prepared for what is coming. And even if you up your spending, and even if Macron says that, and people take it in and do something about it, I think you would still, in a circumstance like that, always look as Europe, and even as the big nations, Germany, France, Italy, and so on, you would still always look to the US to get the nod of like, is this okay? Will you have our back? Will you support us in this? So I think to have this new administration coming in with the kind of shift of tone, shift of policy, it is worrying because as Europe, and especially as Germany, you always look towards the US and say, is this something where you will stand with us, where you will support us? And that was in times of crisis, but not in times of war. But now we are in times of war. So I think it's needed even more so to have this reassurance from the US.
Okay. And Patrícia, the view from Brazil or Latin America more broadly on what the United States can do to reassure our allies.
First of all, moms are always right, and they are the best. Mine is my hugest fan, and
I take her. Is this broadcast, by the way? I hope she's not tuning in.
I take her comments very seriously, and I'm sure she's gonna watch this somewhere. So, hi, Mom. Arlete is her name. So, first of all, in Brazil, there's always a huge interest that's related to anything that comes from United States. U.S. politics. Very often, colleagues ask me, but you were here reporting about Brazil related to United States or U.S. politics, and I explain, no, I'm reporting U.S. politics to you guys, to Brazil, because there is a huge interest. From our perspective, what we expect as a country, I would say, I could maybe read the expectation from our viewers, from the comments that they usually put in when we publish our stories, and I would say how this new administration will be aligned or not aligned with political, not rivals, but with those, presidents that they are not from the right. And now in Brazil, we have, President Lula. So it is a doubt how they both are going to deal with each other, and there is also an expectation about how this new administration will see or deal with topics, for example, as climate change. We just had in Brazil, we all saw the G20, and Brazil and the United States, they signed different agreements. One alliance that US and Brazil just signed is related to the investment in green energy. There is also a commitment with not only both governments, but with the private sector in investing in the reforestation of the Amazon, and President Biden was there, and we all broadcasted the visit that he did to the Amazon forest. So there is a doubt, and we are all paying attention to see how this new administration will keep the deals and the agreements that were signed, not only during the G20, but during the 4 years that we still have ahead.
So I want to stick with you, Patrícia,
Yes.
for 1 minute, because you brought up that Lula is coming back to Brazil, and that's one interesting thing since we have a former president who's now been reelected with a term in between going to somebody else. But also, I believe some of your recent reporting has highlighted a few parallels between the politics of the United States and Brazil, specifically with some similar themes between Bolsonaro and Trump. Just wondered if you could elaborate for our audience a bit on that.
Yeah, because I spoke with with a colleague that interviewed me during the elections, and he was asking about parallels between U.S. and Brazil, and I mentioned that by that time we were still covering the election, and we were pretty much focused on the polarization here in this country that we have in Brazil. We have been seeing this in the past years, and some similarities in a sense that we also have seen, unfortunately, in the past recent events related to political violence and situations as last year we had our January 8th, we have a former president that suffered also an assassination attempt in 2018, and this is related to Brazil, but in South America, I lived in Buenos Aires for 6 years, and I was covering 18 to 20 countries in South America, traveling and working and reporting from there, and we have seen situations of political instability. We see what happened in Ecuador, for example, last year. We were shocked to see Fernando Villavicencio, a presidential candidate, who was shot and killed in front of everyone during the daylight. And I say, unfortunately, we have seen those situations in South America. And when I was reporting along our colleagues what happened, for example, with President-elect Trump, I said in this interview that I was cool in the sense of I saw this happening in other countries. And however, it was a surprise to see this happening here in the United States. And one thing that I've learned is that even the most, stable country that it is or have been a model to the world, countries like here, United States, in some point might face huge challenges, right?
Okay, thank you. And Richard, I recently read that the Canadian government is reanimating a panel that they had, is reanimating a government panel for the next administration. And also, you brought up that Justin Trudeau might have a difficult time as an incumbent coming up, but from the perspective here, it seems like he's been in charge for 9 years and 17 days, I think, is what, by one count. In the same time period, we've had more churn, so I just wondered if that affects our neighbors' views of what's happening down here.
2015 election was my last assignment in Canada, covering the Trudeau campaign before moving to the U.S. The parliamentary system is a little bit different in Canada, but yes, there will be an election next year. And from what I can see right now is that the Trudeau government, they're sending what they call a charm offensive. They send ministers, their envoys, people who've worked with the Trump administration before, to put that charm offensive and just remind the White House, the incoming administration, of the trade, the integrated trade between the two countries, whether it's the auto sector. If you drive a Ford or a Chevy, chances are your steering wheel or some component was made in Canada, another part was made in Mexico, parts in the U.S. There's more to Canada than exporting maple syrup and hockey players and Ryan Reynolds. So there's charm offensive is going to be all about reminding the incoming administration and keeping the stability of the Canada-U.S. economic relationship. 2016, Trump comes in. At the time, Trudeau was just elected, and he was sort of portrayed by some of the media outlets here as this progressive unicorn who was the antidote to the incoming Trump administration. They got along quite well early on in the administration, but they had a spectacular falling out shortly thereafter. This charm offensive that the Canadian government is going to embark upon, I don't know if it'll have the same success as as under Trump 1.0, as compared to Trump 2.0. Politically speaking, with the Canadian election on the horizon, and I know the most exciting thing that you guys want to hear about is Canadian politics, but Trudeau's up for re-election next year. He's down in the polls, but his team is already positioning himself to Canadian voters as an experienced team who knows how to deal with, they dealt with Trump 1.0, they know how to deal with Trump 2.0. His conservative challenger, who's, I believe, 20 points up in polls, he's still trying to come up with his strategy. But like Trump, his political vision is a bit more domestic. It's a very strong economic focus, which seems to be resonating more with Canadian voters than with what the Trudeau brand is selling as they approach his, fourth term now. So that's that charm offensive they were talking about. Whether it's successful, unclear with this incoming administration. The two have history with each other. And so that's where it stands right now.
Okay, thank you. Great socks, by the way. Very appropriate. And then Daniel, in 2020 you wrote a book, This is America, and I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about what your research suggested then and how you would update it, if you would update it now.
The longer I'm here, the less I know, or the less I understand, I feel like. It was basically a summary of the first 4 years of Trump. It just came out before the election. And then, no, that's not true. It came out in the last week of February 2020. So it wasn't exactly a bestseller after all the bookshops closed down worldwide. But anyway, I would update in a sense that I think we have to, electoral politics as such, I think the way we receive information, the way we consume media, the way we perceive voters is different now. I think, you know, you cannot assume that you see someone and say, oh, you are black, you are African American, you are going to vote Democrats, you are Latino, you are going to vote for Democrats. I think that doesn't work anymore, if it ever did. And, you know, these are stereotypes. These are, you know, this isn't just one group of people. There's different histories, different ancestors, and so on. And to just assume you see someone and you know how they feel, how they vote, what issues they care about. I think we, as media also, if I've learned anything from this campaign, we have to question ourselves, you know, are we asking the right questions? Are we going to the right places? So in that sense, I would probably do an update and include what I learned there. And then again, you know, I guess that's a point I was trying to make earlier when I said, you know, the choice between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump again. The idea that there is something appealing about what he says, how he does it, and it is still this outsider mentality. Even if he, you know, in school books, he'll be in this list of U.S. presidents. He'll, you know, he is one of them. He was here in Washington for 4 years, and still he can sort of pretend and say, I'm, you know, I have nothing to do with this place. I don't know her. Washington, what is this? But the idea that he can get something out of people with his promises, with his, I wouldn't exactly call them ideas in some cases, but you know, it resonates with people. That there is something that he taps into that I don't know if we fully understood or fully discovered in what way this works, as opposed to someone who's a career politician who has the best resume you could think of, who, you know, went to prestigious schools, who ran different campaigns and so on. It doesn't matter. That doesn't get you anywhere. And whether it's a changed election or not, I think there's still stories that are untold about what happened, how we in certain ways as media got this wrong, how the Democrats got this wrong. And so I think from my perspective, the work begins now.
Yeah, I think there will be a lot of analyses coming out in the near future about this. Well, this has been another fabulous panel, and again, I wish we had the whole day to discuss, but thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your attention.